VikesNow. I am Dustin Baker. This is the Week 14 edition, the final edition of the week. We'll be back on Monday to discuss something, hopefully a Vikings dub. But I'm here with Tyler Ireland. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
Not bad. We were just talking off air. I don't know if you call it breaking news, but news. Sean Mannion has gone to the Seattle Seahawks. He just plays hopscotch back and forth between the Vikings and Seahawks. He didn't start a game this year, thank God. But that's going to give me a direct segue into a topic that we knew we'd be talking about today when yourself, Dakota, and me spoke last Friday. Is we were going to have a little quarterback debate, which we had. And then when it got down to brass tacks, Kevin O'Connell announced Josh Dobbs as a starter. And it didn't sound like he had a whole lot of ponderance or deliberation. It was Dobbs, and he gave a very O'Connell eternal optimist speech that Dobbs was the guy. So with Dobbs in, are you happy?
I mean, I'm neutral is the best way to put it. He's 2-2. He had two great games. He had two not great games. It's not Nick Mullins, thank the Lord. Obviously continuity was a big factor with sticking with Dobbs. He's played 4 games already. It's not just like the wide receivers. It's, the exchange between the center and the quarterback as well, calling protections, all the nitty gritty stuff. So I understand the decision. I don't think Mullins is better than Dobbs. And even if I personally like Hall, he's not significantly better to the point where you can just yank out Dobbs and put him in. Or I don't think the Vikings felt that way. I think the key with Dobbs is let's see how he does with Justin Jefferson. That's going to be the big thing. Does having Jefferson out there help alleviate some of the pressure off of, Dobbs and then Addison as well? But that's the big thing is Jefferson coming back, and the Vikings are just trying to protect Jaren Hall. They wanted this to be a redshirt year for him. And if Dobbs struggles, you're going to get Mullins, who's going to, come in there. But you really don't want that to happen. You're kind of hoping that Dobbs figures it out again and gets back to his, that first 2-game stretch where he looked really good.
On Hall, I was right there with you that if it were up to me, I would have enjoyed seeing him down the stretch. But it dawned on me really early on during this quarterback debate that you and I and the fan base that was very loud about Hall, we're looking at it through a lens of this team isn't going to win a Super Bowl, so why not just play Jaren Hall? The problem is the coaching staff, the Vikings, doesn't think that way. They don't think, well, we're not going to win the Super Bowl. They have to think we're going to win the Super Bowl. Otherwise, they're not good at their jobs. So we looked at it from a bird's eye view. Like, we might as well see a rookie 5th rounder. And Kevin Hall is convinced that, hey, I can still win a Super Bowl with this group.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point there because, the Super Bowl is always the goal. But when we look at before the Kirk Cousins injury and then after, the Vikings weren't winning it this year at all. Regardless, I mean, Kirk was playing great, and that is not a shot at Kirk at all. But the roster around him, was not at the level of the Niners or the Eagles or anything close to that. So one argument you could make is, well, the Vikings punted on the season because they only traded a 6th-round pick for Dobbs, who's just kind of a high-end backup. But, I mean, were they really punting on the season if they weren't going to win regardless? I mean, that's an interesting topic right there.
And I agree. I think with Dobbs, the objective for the Vikings is always going to just get in the dance and see what happens. Look at the 2017 Eagles, and so the Dobbs the Dobbs trade made sense then, and it still makes sense now, especially because he helped them win the first 2 games that he was in. But I will always lament, even though it's just revisionist history, that right when Kirk was at the peak of his powers, certainly this season, maybe in his career, knocking off the 49ers, looking pretty damn spiffy against the Packers, that was right when the Flores defense was getting so damn good. So it almost feels like this season ended up having like a 11-6 or 10-7 ceiling when they started 1-4. And I don't even think that's that controversial of a take. So it is depressing that Kirko, just won't be around the rest of the way. And then the defense got good, but such is life.
Yeah, and if you were to ask me if Kirk went down, would you have rather the Vikings traded a first round pick for Sam Bradford like they did a few seasons back, or traded a six for Dobbs? I would have told you Dobbs. Like Bradford, better quarterback for sure, but it's not worth risking your future just to try and be somewhat competitive this year. Kirk goes down and you're pretty much toast regardless. And I think the big thing for the Vikings is just improving the running game, because it was bad with Kirk, it's bad now, and you're not winning the Super Bowl without being able to average 4 more yards per carry. It just doesn't really happen unless you have Mahomes back there.
Yeah, one thing that we as fans have gotten wrong in the last decade as pass happiness has taken over, it's when we hear establish the run or we hear about running backs, it tends to get on our nerves because we want to be a pass happy sport. But you can uplift the running game and still have a pass happy attack. So like the Saints game, for example, if the play calling there, if Alexander Madison's able to get 4 or 5 yards per carry, you can pretty much end that football game. But I'm right there with you. The Vikings ceiling it's almost impossible to be a Super Bowl because they can't run the football, despite, trying Chandler a little bit, trying Madison. Oh, Dakota has joined us. How are you, Dakota?
I am so good. How are you guys doing?
Not bad. Before we move on to our second question, let's get your Dobbs. It's Dobbs after all. How do you feel?
Obviously, like I said last week, this is kind of where I saw us going. I wouldn't be surprised again if he's on a short leash. Although I am a little bit scared now that we know that Max Crosby is playing on their defensive line. I don't think that turnovers are going to be as big of an issue, but I'm not surprised if, we have 1 or 2 turnovers and Nick Mullins is in there. So
we hope that doesn't come to that. I feel the Vikings, because I always go through the math and the numbers almost to a point of madness. They are really due to stop the turnovers, because last year they had 12 at this point. This year they have 24 through 13 weeks. So I don't think there's anything fundamentally flawed with the team. Now, if it's just Dobbs, a parade of turnovers, then that would be a bad difference maker. But we shall see. Transitioning into Raiders week, Tyler, I'm going to ask you point blank, is there a player, like a primary player that nobody is talking about, that could be an X factor or somebody who could help seal the deal to get this team to 7-6 on the Vikings roster, of course?
Yeah, I'll mention one player here, is Ed Ingram. Him not being 100% scares me. We've seen what damage Ed Ingram can do when he's not setting his feet properly and he's forcing turnovers against, our own offense. And the fact that he's dealing with a hip injury, just limited in practice, it scares me even more that even if he's not causing a turnover, that he's just going to get destroyed this game. So that's my primary concern, where you're looking at a player who normally shouldn't be a factor. Like he's played well the past few games, like Ed Ingram, but it might rear its ugly head a little bit with that injury. So we'll see how he looks on Sunday.
And without Ingram, or excuse me, if he fell injured during the game or was ruled out, I think it would be Blake Brandel. And I think Vikings fans have a generally optimistic opinion of him. We don't have Ezra Cleveland anymore. He is with the Jaguars, playing a little bit now. I think somebody got hurt out there. Dakota, do you have an unsung player that you have labeled for Raiders-Vikings?
It's no secret that I'm a huge fan of Cam Bynum. Seeing that Aiden O'Connell kind of has some, I don't want to say as big of an issue of turnovers as 4 interceptions in one game, but from what I've been seeing of his gameplay, I wouldn't be surprised if we do get a couple of turnovers on from our defense. So I have to go Cam Bynum. I feel like just without a doubt, this entire season, he's really been sort of this guy who's risen through the ranks and has really become something that I don't really think anyone was expecting him to be. So I'm going to put Cam Bynum in there for my more positive take. On a little bit of a negative note, I know me, the queen of positivity, going negative. I am still a little bit nervous about Justin Jefferson. I will be honest. I know that he was taking his time with that injury, but I think it was the Monday night game, we saw somebody go down who had just recently also experienced a hamstring injury. So I'm a little little cautious, but I mean, I'm also somebody who struggles with an injury, so anytime I see anything, I always get really nervous. So
Don't put that bad juju on us,
I'm
Dakota.
sorry, I have to be honest. It's Dustin made me swear to be honest. It's a whole thing.
It would the weird thing, the bad thing about hamstrings is if he does retweak it, he's right back to square one. You can't usually you don't mildly just I mean, I know this from years of basketball fandom and playing basketball in high school. You're back to square one. We shall see. On Cam Bynum, we've been through an odyssey with him. You might recall the 2021 season as a rookie in those 2 AFC games against the Chargers and the Ravens. Harrison Smith was out or suspended or something. I can't remember what it was. I think he was hurt. And Bynum came in and looked wonderful. And then in Ed Donatell's defense last year, he was just a guy. And now, lo and behold, among safeties, he's like 8th or 9th in Pro Bowl voting. And he's the reason Lewis Cine doesn't play football for the Vikings on defense is because Cam Bynum's so damn good. You don't need Cine for better or worse. So yeah, on unsung players, I can see both of those. One other topic before we get to a prediction that I want to get to is the Vikings playoff math has been muddied, A, because of their loss against the Bears, which was just fatal if they end up not reaching the postseason, and B, the Packers, almost exactly like last year. They're basically running it back with the way that they did things last year without Aaron Rodgers. They got off to a rotten start. They had a real rough patch in October-ish. Now they won 4 of the last 5. I recall looking at their schedule about 3 weeks ago, thinking, well, they got the Lions and Chiefs. They won't win those, but then they'll win their last 4 because they're get cakewalk schedule. But then they beat the Lions and Chiefs. So, Tyler, I'm going to ask you, are the Packers good? Actually good?
I don't even know. They're such a young team, and it's so hard to evaluate them. One thing you talk about the Chiefs specifically. Isn't it odd that 2 of our NFC North rivals' statement wins came against Kansas City? Detroit in week 1 without Kelsey and Chris Jones, and then Green Bay last week. Like, can't Kansas City, do us a solid and beat these teams? Come on. But, I don't know if they're, good enough as far as, better than the Vikings. I mean, it's tough. I'll say this. They're good enough to be second place in the NFC North, which that's really all that matters. When you lose 2 games to Denver and Chicago before the bye week, it really screws everything up. And this could have been prevented had you just, beaten the teams that you were supposed to beat if you're Minnesota. So it's frustrating where we're at 500, entering a must-win game against Las Vegas. And now Green Bay is surging at the right time. So we'll see what happens, but that Vikings-Packers game is going to be a lot more interesting now. So,
oh yeah, it has a good opportunity to doom one of the teams. The Vikings already have the tiebreaker, so it might box the Packers out of playoff position. But then again, I look back at the Packers schedule and it's really just tailor-made, like out of a movie script. Besides the Vikings game, you can't get much easier down the stretch. So we shall see on that particular game how much I'm sure it will matter, but if it will be in or out. There's a real viable chance now that the Vikings and Packers both reach the postseason, and in these remaining Sundays, they're just jostling for the 6th and 7th seed. So, Dakota, I will ask you the same question, what you've seen from Jordan Love. I presume you don't really like the Packers, but set that aside. Do you think that are they good? Or are they lucky?
I don't think they're good. They're definitely getting somewhere. I think they finally have gotten into a rhythm that makes sense for them. I think they finally know where they're at and what sort of their statement as a team is. I still think that there are some pretty big flaws. But I wouldn't be surprised if they're a lot more consistent next year. I think it really depends on how well they draft. My biggest issue, I think, is that we are not very good at home this season.
Yeah,
and
sucks.
we face off with them at kind of a pivotal moment. I wouldn't be surprised if both of us end up in the playoffs. I think at this point it really comes down to the next 2 weeks. They've got the Giants, they've got the Buccaneers. We lost against the Buccaneers. And considering the Patriots won last night, I don't know. I really genuinely think that it's an any given Sunday the last couple of weeks here in the season, and I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced by the by the Packers, but who knows what they draft and how well they look next season. But right now, I don't know. I'm not convinced.
And are both of you on tap to attend that game, or just Tyler?
I'm definitely attending Vikings Packers. I'm really looking forward to it. I hope we ruin their playoff chances. That's my hope. So I'm circling it on my calendar.
Right now I'm still a maybe, unfortunately, due to the fact that, with my knee injury and I'm not
Yeah.
working lately, airfare's been a little bit hard to figure out, but I'm staying positive. I'm hoping that something makes its way into my general vicinity and I'm able to snag onto that.
Yeah, the ticket prices for that one are bad.
Yeah.
Expensive, yeah. All right, let's get into predictions. I judiciously say this because everybody in the world thought Thursday night football that you just mentioned, Steelers, Patriots, which are like 4 years ago used to be a wonderful football game. I had like the lowest under points heading into the game in a decade. And then they came out and shattered the over under in 2 quarters. But I will rest on my laurels because Josh Dobbs and Aiden O'Connell are the starting quarterbacks. And in the last 6 weeks, both defenses rank in the top 5 for EPA per play, if that can be believed. I think the Vikings will win this 17-13. It'll be sort of similar to the Panthers game where you're like, you felt good about the win, but it certainly wasn't like, woo, look at us. I think they'll find a way to win, and then we'll use the Belichickism on to Cincinnati. Tyler, what do you got for a prediction and a score? Raiders-Vikings.
Yeah, I got the Vikings winning unconvincingly, just out of pure desperation after losing the last two, 17-16. These next two games are really interesting to me personally because it's like you're playing 2 teams without their starting quarterback. So like Aiden O'Connell, you've got a rookie, and then you got Jake Browning. I don't even know which team is better out of the two. But I think the Vikings win this one barely.
Yeah, Browning looked great on Monday Night Football. On the whole, the Raiders recently have had a better defense. Coaching nod probably goes to Zach Taylor. Yeah, it's interesting to debate which team will be tougher. If the Vikings lose to the Raiders, then I will tell you here and now and all of next week, it is a backs against the wall desperation game, basically an elimination game, because you can't fall to 6-8 with the Rams nipping at you, the Packers, the Seahawks. So it's not necessarily a mathematical must win. But then if they lose, the playoff percentage dips to like 30 something percent, very low in 30s, and then you absolutely have to beat Jake Browning's Bengals. Dakota.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
reminds me
sorry.
of the Chargers game where you start 0-2 and you're like you really want to win this one.
Mm-hmm.
And if you lose to the Raiders, it's like post Chargers game where it's like, okay, you've lost the last 3 and you need to win to just save it all.
Yeah, thankfully for their sake, we know that they have the DNA to rip off 5 wins in a row. I don't know if they can do them twice against the Lions, but I think I know they'll make it a lot easier if they just find a way to knock off the Raiders. Dakota, do you think they'll do it?
I think they'll do it. I also have them at 17, although I have them winning 17-10.
Okay.
I really think it's just going to come down to the turnover game, whose defense is better at, taking the ball away. I also wouldn't be surprised if, because we have been so like, is he going to play? Is he not going to play with Justin Jefferson? They don't really know what to do with him. I would also say that I feel like we're going to win this game. I'm not as optimistic about the Bengals game. Again, like you said, Jake Browning looks fantastic. But I think we come away with the win here. I'm not too convinced on that Raiders offense. Plus, 54% of the ticket sales went to Vikings fans. I mean, it's going to be like that Miami game last year where it's just purple and gold all the way.
It's worth noting as well, even though they've only had 3 or 4 chances at it in franchise history, the Vikings have never won back-to-back road games at AFC teams in back-to-back weeks. They've only, like I said, had the opportunity 3 or 4 times, and each time either lost both or just won one. All right, Dakota, where do we find you on social media?
Well, when I'm not late because I have a cold, you can find me at on Twitter at Kirk's Minivan, and you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Western Dakota. Fun fact, I'm followed by the Detroit Lions now. We're best friends. Don't know how that happened, but shout out to the Detroit Lions, and yeah.
Yeah, we'll do that now. We won't do that during Lions Week.
No,
we can get it out of the way now.
because they're they got a really nice people running their social media team. Hi, but like in a couple weeks. No, we don't know each other.
Tyler,
careful what you say. You might regret it later. Yeah, you can find me on dailynorseman.com and also the noise if you're looking for Dolphins coverage. If I doubt many people watching this will care about the Miami Dolphins, but if you are, check out thenoise.com as well.
All right, guys, I appreciate both of you. We will talk in 1 week, hopefully about the 7-6 Vikings. If not, we'll be talking about, you guessed it, desperation against the Bengals. You guys have a wonderful weekend and following week. All right.
Awesome. Thanks. Bye, Dustin.
Yep.
All right, later.
Later.